Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a totally fascinating historical investigation. We're looking at one of antiquity's most dramatic royal emergencies, King Hezekiah's sudden, seemingly miraculous recovery from the absolute brink of death. Now, to really understand this, we're going to examine it through the lens of a historian by looking at two incredibly rich texts. On one hand, we've got the well-known, highly spiritual narrative from the biblical text of Isaiah chapter 38. But on the other hand, we're going to layer in some brilliant, highly pragmatic political insights from the first-century historian Flavius Josephus, specifically from his work, Antiquities of the Jews. By comparing these two accounts side by side, we start to uncover a story that isn't just about a guy's personal health crisis, it's actually about the very survival of an entire kingdom.
Here's how we're going to break this down today. First, a sudden royal crisis. Second, the succession dilemma. Third, Isaiah and the prophecy. Fourth, the impossible sign. And finally, number 5, recovery and legacy. Let's dive in.
Part 1. A sudden royal crisis. So, picture a sovereign leader at the absolute peak of his power, right? He just survived a terrifying external threat, only to suddenly face a lethal, invisible enemy from inside his own failing body. To really get why this was such a massive shock, you gotta look at the timing. According to Josephus, Hezekiah had just experienced this miraculous, surprising deliverance. His enemies had been completely destroyed by divine assistance, and the survivors were so terrified they just packed up and departed from Jerusalem. The king and all his people were offering thank offerings, completely zealous and diligent in their worship. Life was good. But then, out of nowhere, tragedy hits. Isaiah chapter 38, verse 1, tells us that Hezekiah became, quote, sick unto death. And Josephus corroborates this perfectly. He notes that the king fell into a severe distemper. Now, this wasn't just a bad cold. The situation was so incredibly dire that his top physicians entirely despaired of his life. They expected absolutely no good issue from his sickness. Even his closest friends just gave up hope. I mean, think about it. He had survived this massive invading army, but a microscopic distemper was about to take down the leader of the nation.
Moving on to Part 2, the succession dilemma. Now, this is where our investigation pivots from a straightforward medical emergency to a full-blown political crisis. Because this wasn't just a man dying, this was an entire government teetering on the edge of collapse.
So I want you to consider the true root of Hezekiah's intense panic here. Why was a king, a guy who had quite literally just witnessed divine protection of his own city, so completely, absolutely terrified of his impending mortality? Was he just scared of the unknown? Did he just want to hold on to his royal luxuries a little bit longer? Well, the answer is a whole lot more complicated.
If you read Isaiah chapter 38, verse 3, the text simply states that Hezekiah wept bitterly. It paints a picture of deep spiritual and personal distress, a man turning his face to the wall in solitary grief. But Josephus? He totally pulls back the curtain to reveal a highly pragmatic terror. The historian points out that Hezekiah's profound trouble wasn't because he was sad to leave his wealth or his kingdom's advantages. No, it was actually a deeply political panic over dying childless.
Josephus lays it out super clearly. He writes, "He was childless and was going to die and leave his house and his government without a successor of his own body." This was a melancholy circumstance that completely disordered the king. He wasn't just a dying man. He was a leader terrified of a severed royal bloodline. So, Hezekiah's desperate, tearful prayer to prolong his life, it was specifically, urgently motivated by the need to father a son. He basically entreated God to give him just a little more time, not to enjoy being king for longer, but so he wouldn't depart this life before securing the succession.
Part 3, Isaiah and the prophecy. Okay, so we've established the immense political and personal pressure resting squarely on the shoulders of a dying king. Let's look at how this crisis was met with a highly specific divine response through the prophet.
God actually had mercy on Hezekiah, accepting his plea precisely because his motives were focused on the continuity of his government. God sends the prophet Isaiah with a multi-layered promise. Let's map this out real quick. Number 1, the prophecy is delivered. Number 2, Isaiah tells the king that within exactly 3 days he will be completely clear of his distemper. 3, he's promised an additional 15 years of survival. And 4, this is the real kicker for that political panic we just talked about. The prophecy promises that he shall have children. The kingdom is going to get its successor.
But here's the thing. Despite this incredibly comprehensive prophecy, Hezekiah really struggled to believe it. And honestly, can you blame the guy? The text points out two huge reasons for his doubt. First, the extreme severity of his sickness. His body was in absolute agony, and the kingdom's top medical experts had already declared him a lost cause. Second, the sheer, shocking nature of the news. I mean, going from a terminal diagnosis with a looming dynastic collapse to full recovery in 3 days, 15 more years of life, and a guaranteed heir, it was just too much to process all at once.
Which brings us to part 4, the impossible sign. Let's see how this all builds up to the king demanding undeniable, miraculous proof. He needed something tangible to crush those heavy doubts.
10. That is the magic number Hezekiah settled on. To believe this sweeping, life-altering prophecy, he needed to see something equally unbelievable. When Isaiah asked him what sign he wanted, Hezekiah requested that the shadow of the sun literally travel backward by 10 steps or 10 degrees in his house.
Here is exactly how Josephus records this mind-bending cosmic event. Hezekiah, quote, desired that he would make the shadow of the sun to return again to the same place, and to make it as it was before. Now, why such a bizarre, massive request? Well, Josephus gives us this brilliant historian's rationale. He argues that things completely beyond our expectation, like suddenly being cured of a fatal disease and securing a royal bloodline, are made credible only by actions of a similar, impossible nature. It's like fighting impossible news with impossible physics. To believe the promise, the king needed to see an impossible physical reality with his own eyes. Finally, part 5, recovery and legacy. Let's wrap up our investigation by looking at the immediate aftermath of this crazy cosmic sign and how that huge succession crisis was ultimately resolved.
Once the prophet prayed for the sign, things moved fast. Let's trace his steps. 1. Hezekiah actually sees what he asked for. The sun's shadow moves backward. 2. The second he witnesses it, boom, he is entirely freed from his distemper. 3. Acting immediately on this miraculous health, he heads straight up to the temple. And 4. He worships God and makes his vows. Now, while Isaiah highlights the spiritual humility of these vows, Josephus kind of implies that these were the vows of a pragmatic leader, a guy securing his end of a divine bargain to save his state. So the medical crisis is officially averted. But what about the political one?
Well, this perfectly illustrates the fulfillment of that timeline. 2 Kings chapter 21 verse 1 drops this little detail. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign. Why does this mathematical detail matter so much to us? Because it proves that Hezekiah's desperate, tearful prayer for an heir was answered precisely 3 years into his miraculous 15-year extension. By the time Hezekiah finally passed away at the end of those 15 years, his son Manasseh was exactly 12 years old and ready to take the throne. The succession was totally secured.
So, we've seen a man weeping for his soul in Isaiah and a monarch utterly terrified for his government in Josephus. I'll leave you with this question. Does uncovering a king's political motives change how we understand his ancient spiritual miracles? Does it make the narrative somehow less divine, or does it just make it profoundly relatable human? Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope diving into these texts leaves you eager to dig up even more hidden layers of ancient history. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.